I've got these bad boys, so naturally you're going to join me while we build them. So, hi, what's your drink of choice? If it's not a Negroni, Spagliato with Prosecco in it.
A Negroni?
I was going to say the same thing.
Spagliato. With Prosecco in it.
Oh, stunning.
Yeah.
Then you didn't get my reference and we can't be friends anymore. I'm joking. But you're here for Gollum, so that makes you cool. So let's go. This is going to be part 1 of 3 because there is a lot to unpack here. So the structure of this little mini-series, it will look like this. In today's video, we will talk about his life before The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. In the next video, we'll talk about the events that occurred during The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And in the third and final video, we will focus on his legacy, notable changes as well from the books and the movies, because there's quite a few. So here goes. Gollum, one of the most interesting characters in J.R.R. Tolkien's stories. That's always really hard to say because you end up kind of sounding like a pirate. J.R.R. Tolkien. Anyway, he used to be a regular hobbit-like creature, but over time he became this twisted, mysterious figure. His character, it shows this inner battle between good and evil, the way he changes between this kind-hearted Sméagol, who is actually quite cute, and then this super mean Gollum, who's this really powerful example of a struggle of power dynamic. When you meet a character like this, you just can't help but wonder how they ended up this way. What happened in Sméagol's life that turned him so dark? How did he get so hooked on the One Ring? And there are plenty of other questions too, like where was he born? How old is he? Who are his family members? What does he do in his downtime? Does he go to McDonald's? And what's his go-to McDonald's order? And why is it the fillet of fish? That was... Anyway, Gollum's story, it's full of fascinating details with these complex relationships, these mysteries, betrayals, and even some pretty gross moments. But let's take a look at sort of how it all began, and we'll build Sméagol and Deagol. So, all right, before we finally really get into Gollum's backstory, there's something kind of important to understand. Now, his history, it isn't exactly crystal clear. So even in the books, a lot of what we know about him, it comes from guesswork. And who's doing all that guessing? Not us. No, Gandalf. Gandalf the Grey. Now, Gandalf, he didn't just pull these ideas out of thin air. He based most of what he knows on his own chats with Gollum. So let's be real, Gollum, he's not the most reliable source. he's been through a lot and he's kind of all over the place. So while Gandalf is super smart and usually right on the money, we still have to keep in mind that parts of Gollum's story are pieced together from secondhand info. That said, it's still best to look at what we've got into who Gollum really was before he became this creepy, ring-obsessed creature that we meet in Lord of the Rings. So with all of that in mind, we're going to start with his early days and then go from there. So when it comes to figuring out where Gollum actually came from, Gandalf has some pretty solid ideas, and honestly, they're more detailed than you might expect. Early on in the Fellowship of the Ring, Gandalf's having this really cool conversation with Frodo that he's kind of explaining that he thinks Gollum's people were of hobbit kind, and specifically connected to this old branch of hobbits called the Stoors. Now, you might be thinking, wait, what is a Stoor? And that's a totally fair question. In Tolkien's world, hobbits, they're divided into 3 main types. So you've got the Harfoots, and I say that like Rings of Power. I'm a Harfoot. They were all these, we're all familiar with them, right? Because of their irritatingly, obviously pointless storyline within Rings of Power, but a cool song. Anyway, you've also got Fallowhides, and then you've got the Stoors. Now the Stoors, they're kind of the bigger, sturdier hobbits. They're broader, they're a bit heavier, and fun fact, they can actually grow facial hair, which it's not really common in hobbits. They love rivers and boats, which sets them apart from the other groups. Basically, they just love the quiet, rolling hills, second breakfasts, and getting 14 kids out of Rosie Cotton. I digress. So even though Gollum, he doesn't look like a hobbit anymore, it seems like he started off as one, or at least something close. His people lived near the Great River, and this was 500 or 600 years before the events of Lord of the Rings, so a long time ago. But Gandalf, he also thinks that Gollum might have had some kind of important family background, like maybe he came from hobbit nobility. Now, we're not talking castles and crowns or anything, but in hobbit culture, some families had more influence than others, and it looks like Sméagol, which is his original name, it may have come from one of those higher up families. It's kind of crazy when you think about it, because he wasn't always a creepy cave dweller. He might have actually had a pretty respectable start in life, which makes it even more depressing. But as Gandalf is chatting with Frodo in the Fellowship of the Ring, he drops a few more juicy details about Sméagol's early life. He mentions that he came from this well-known, respected family among his people, and basically they're a big deal. His grandmother even ruled over their little community, which is pretty rare for hobbit kind. She was seen as like a matriarch, kind of like a queen, but without the crown, which sucks. But anyway, in case that wasn't fancy enough, you've got Gandalf says that Sméagol, he was the most inquisitive and curious-minded of the bunch. So he was the kid who always asked why, he poked at things he shouldn't, and probably drove the adults a little bit nuts with all of his questions. But here's the thing, even though he came from wealth and status, he wasn't arrogant or full of himself. Instead of strutting around with his nose in the air, he was the kid who just literally looked down. He was fascinated with the world below, rivers, tunnels, caves, all that mysterious hidden stuff. He loved diving into deep waters and digging around in the earth, kind of like a mix between a curious explorer and someone who wanted to just disappear underground. This habit of always looking down, well, that detail kind of ends up a little too on the nose later on in his story, but we're getting ahead of ourselves, so let's keep going. There were things that kind of started to take a really seriously dark turn. So one day, Sméagol and his friend Eagle, they head off on a fishing trip. Just the two of them, far from home. Seems innocent enough, right? But during that trip, Deagle, he gets yanked into the water by a huge fish. Like, imagine a catfish with a grudge. The ones you see on that TV show, River Monsters. So while he's underwater, I'm under the water, sorry. Deagle, he spots this shiny buried, something that's shiny and buried in the riverbed. And it turns out it's the One Ring. Now Deagle, he comes back up and he's so excited. He's like, yay. And Sméagol, like, he wants it. And not just a little bit, like, he needs it. He tells Deagle, hand it over, it's my birthday. And in his mind, he deserves it because it's his birthday. Now Deagle, he doesn't agree. Sméagol just snaps. He murders his friend right there, on the spot, just to take the ring. I mean, what's not a birthday without some jewellery and a dash of murder? Anyway, what gets me is how sneaky Sméagol is afterwards. So he hides the body. He makes it look like nothing has happened. He heads back home like it was just another day. Like he could easily feature on one of these Netflix series about friends who kill. But from that moment on, everything starts to change for him. He thinks he's just scored this like amazing, cool little prize, but he has no idea of the kind of dark magic this ring holds. So slowly it starts to twist his mind and his body, and Sméagol begins slipping away little by little, and that creepy little voice in his head, the one we all know as Gollum, starts to take over. Now this is just the beginning of the end for Sméagol, the Sméagol that we once know. It doesn't take long for things to just really spiral. After killing Deagle, getting his hands on the ring, he discovers he has this crazy ability. He can make himself invisible. Now, naturally, he keeps this little perk to himself, but instead of using it for like harmless pranks maybe, or sneaking that extra slice of cake when your nan's not looking, he starts using it like a spy. That's actually not a bad idea. But anyway, he begins spying on people. He's digging up their secrets. Then he's turning around and using it to like mess with them, and he starts stealing and lying and doing all this sort of like shady stuff. And the ring's already sinking its claws into him and feeding all of those, like, his worst instincts. Unsurprisingly, his family and his community, they're not thrilled with this new version of Sméagol. The more selfish and nasty he becomes, the more they push him away. Gandalf even mentions that things get so tense, his relatives, they would straight up just kick him out of frustration. And how does he respond? Not by like, hey, don't kick me, he bites their feet. Literal foot biting. And he becomes more isolated and more twisted by the ring. Sméagol, he starts talking to himself like a lot, and he develops this weird like guttural throat noise, kind of like a nervous tick, and his family hears it and they start calling him Gollum after the sound, and just like that, the name sticks. So at this point, he's gone from this curious hobbit-like guy with a noble family to a creepy, sneaky, foot fetish outcast who talks to himself and bites people. And the transformation is just getting started. Eventually, no surprise, he becomes way too intense for everyone around him. His family, his neighbours, who've put up with a lot, finally hit their limit. People start telling him outright that he should just leave already, and the whole community is over it. And even his own grandmother, the family matriarch, just no crown, has had enough. In an effort to restore some peace and quiet, he's exiled. She kicks him out for good. So Gollum, weeping and bitter, he leaves behind his home, his family, and whatever left of his whole old life he had of Sméagol, and now he's just totally alone. He heads off into the wild. He's clinging to the only thing he's got left, the One Ring. He follows the great river north, and he's wandering through the wilderness and slowly becoming more and more feral. Think like Tarzan, but bad. Along the way, he picks up a new habit, using the ring's invisibility to sneak up on fish and eat them raw. Not exactly gourmet dining, but it works for him. So eventually the ring, it leads him toward a smaller river that flows out of the Misty Mountains. Now, wanting to get away from the sunlight, which he's grown to hate, he follows the water into the dark tunnels and caves beneath the mountains. It's cold, it's damp, it's completely cut off from the outside world, and Gollum, to him, it feels like home. Down there, deep under the rock and the stone, he just disappeared from the world, like, for centuries. And that's where he stays, alone. hidden and just slowly twisting further into the creature that we meet much later in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Now, interestingly, when he first slinks into the tunnels beneath the Misty Mountains, it's not because he hates the sunlight. I know he's grown to dislike it, but or needs a new hiding space. At first, he's actually still got that tiny spark of curiosity left in him. He hopes he might find strange and fascinating things buried deep under the roots of the mountains, hidden secrets, even maybe more lost treasures, who knows? But that curious part of Sméagol is still hanging on just for a moment, but it doesn't last long, because once he's down there, he quickly realises that there's nothing. It's just endless darkness, dripping water and cold stone. No treasure, no hidden wonders, no Indiana Jones moment, just isolation. So he settles in, not because he wants to, but because he's got nowhere else to go. And that's where Gollum stays, not for weeks, not for months, but for hundreds of years. Seriously, he survives by fishing in underground pools, eating raw fish as usual, and muttering to himself in the dark. He just spends his days remembering and hating everything about the life he left behind. He's bitter, he's angry, he's full of this self-loathing. The ring doesn't make things easier either, even though it's the one thing he treasures above all else, he also hates it, because deep down, he knows it's the reason he's become the miserable, broken creature in the ring. It just won't let him go, and he couldn't part with it even if he tried, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. To make himself better, or maybe just keep the guilt from eating him alive, he starts calling it his precious and his birthday present, and just repeating the lie that Deagol should have given it to him. It's the only way that he can live with what he did. Over time, the ring's magic, it keeps him alive, far beyond a normal hobbit's lifespan. But it's not a healthy kind of life. It's this slow, creeping corruption. His body becomes twisted and sickly. His mind splits and decays. Sméagol, this curious river dweller, is almost entirely gone. And all that's left is Gollum, bitter, obsessed, alone, and in the dark. And that's his life before Lord of the Rings. I feel like I made that sound cool at the end. I feel like that was the money shot. That really wasn't, was it? Anyway, what was I going to say? I don't even know what I'm saying now. I'm so distracted by my own dramatic effect. Wow, I digress. Please come back for episode 2, because you should. And if you don't, you're missing out. Anyway, please do all those things you need to do only one time to support my tiny channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.